The lace on my custom gown hadn't even touched the dance floor when I found my sister wrapped in my husband's arms. She was wearing white, a dress nearly identical to mine. But the true betrayal wasn't their kiss, it was the devastating secret his mother was about to expose. My name is Natalie. For as long as I can remember, I have existed in the margins of my own life, a quiet observer while my older sister, Vanessa, commanded center stage. In our household, Vanessa wasn't just a daughter, she was an event. My parents, Eleanor and Thomas, didn't intentionally ignore me, but Vanessa had a gravitational pull that demanded all the oxygen in the room. If I got an A on a calculus exam, Vanessa had just booked a national commercial. If I bought my first used car, Vanessa was being whisked away on a yacht by her latest wealthy boyfriend. I learned early on that the safest place for me was in the shadows. I built a good, quiet life. I became a graphic designer, bought a modest townhouse, and surrounded myself with a few loyal friends, like my best friend Megan, who always saw right through Vanessa's manufactured charm. Then I met Tristan. Tristan was the kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in a crowded room. We met at a charity gala I had designed the promotional materials for. He was the heir to a prominent real estate development firm in the city, but he didn't act like a stereotypical trust fund kid. He was grounded, funny, and surprisingly attentive. When he looked at me, he didn't seem to be looking for someone louder, prettier, or more vibrant. He just saw me. We dated for 3 years, and they were the most peaceful years of my life. Tristan made me feel secure in a way I had never experienced. But there was always one looming shadow over our relationship: his mother, Diane. Diane was a terrifying woman. She possessed a cold, aristocratic elegance that made you feel completely inadequate. From the moment Tristan introduced us at their sprawling estate in the Hamptons, I knew I had failed her silent, invisible test. She looked at my off-the-rack dress, my simple jewelry, and my unassuming demeanor, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Natalie," she had purred, sipping her gin and tonic. "Tristan has told me so much about your little art projects. How quaint that you draw for a living." Tristan would always squeeze my hand and tell me to ignore her, promising that Diane was just fiercely protective of her only son. But I always caught Diane watching me with a calculating gaze, as if I were a mild annoyance she was trying to figure out how to swat away. The real trouble, however, began the night we announced our engagement. We hosted a dinner at an upscale French restaurant. My parents were there, beaming. Tristan's father had passed away years ago, so it was just Diane on his side, sitting rigidly at the head of the table. And, of course, there was Vanessa. Vanessa had just returned from a spiritual retreat in Bali, conveniently single, and looking more radiant than ever. When Tristan stood up, clinking his glass to announce that he had proposed to me the night before, the table erupted in applause. My mother cried, but I happened to be looking at Vanessa. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes darted to Tristan, and something dark and unreadable flickered in her gaze. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back. She squealed, leaped out of her chair, and threw her arms around Tristan first, lingering just a second too long before turning to hug me. "Oh, Natty," she whispered in my ear, her perfume suffocatingly sweet. "I'm so surprised. You two are just so comfortable together." Over the next 14 months of wedding planning, Vanessa inserted herself into every aspect of our lives. She nominated herself as maid of honor and used the title as a VIP pass to show up at our apartment unannounced. She would text Tristan late at night, asking for brotherly advice on her investments or her car troubles. Whenever I brought it up, Tristan would laugh it off. "Nat, you know how she is. She's just starved for attention. Don't let it get to you. You're the one I'm marrying." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. I was so blinded by the fairy tale of finally being the one chosen over Vanessa that I completely ignored the red flags flapping violently in the wind. I ignored how Tristan would sometimes quickly lock his phone screen when I walked into the room. I ignored the tight, knowing smirks Diane gave Vanessa whenever we all had dinner together. I thought it was just my lifelong insecurity playing tricks on me. I convinced myself that on my wedding day, Tristan would stand at the altar, look at me, and solidify that I was enough. I had no idea that the wedding day was never going to be mine at all. The morning of the wedding was a masterclass in chaos. We had rented out the entirety of the Oak Haven estate, a sprawling Gothic-style manor surrounded by acres of ancient oak trees and manicured rose gardens. It was supposed to be the perfect venue, a place where I could finally have my singular, shining moment. I was in the bridal suite with Megan and my other bridesmaid, Kelsey. The makeup artists were hovering, the champagne was flowing, and the air was thick with the scent of hairspray and eucalyptus. By 10 a.m., Vanessa was nowhere to be found. "I swear to God, Natalie," Megan muttered, checking her watch. "If she misses the hair and makeup slot, I am not letting her steal your stylist. She can walk down the aisle looking like a wet rat." My mother, Eleanor, clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "Oh, Megan, don't be so dramatic." Vanessa texted me. "She had a minor emergency with her dress. She's handling it." At 11:30 a.m., just 2 hours before the ceremony, the heavy oak doors of the bridal suite swung open. The room went dead silent. Vanessa walked in. She was wearing a floor-length custom silk slip dress. It featured delicate lace appliques along the bodice, a sweeping train, and a plunging neckline. It was breathtaking. It was flawless. And it was completely, undeniably white. My heart dropped into my stomach. My own wedding dress, hanging in the corner of the room, was an A-line ivory gown with lace detailing. Standing side by side, we would look like brides in a double wedding. "Vanessa," I breathed, my voice shaking. "What are you wearing?" Vanessa spun around, the silk pooling elegantly around her ankles, and offered an innocent, wide-eyed look. "Do you like it?" The seamstress completely botched the lavender chiffon dress we agreed on, Nat. "I went to pick it up this morning, and it was ruined, torn right down the back. The boutique owner felt so terrible, she let me pull this from their luxury evening wear rack for free." "That is a wedding dress, Vanessa," Megan said, her voice dangerously low. She stepped between me and my sister like a guard dog. "You are wearing a white wedding dress to your sister's wedding." "It's not white, it's Time's champagne cream," Vanessa retorted, rolling her eyes. She looked at our mother for backup. "It does look a bit light, darling," my mother said hesitantly. But as always, she folded under Vanessa's glare. "But, I suppose in a pinch. We can't have the maid of honor walking down the aisle in jeans, can we? Let's just focus on Natalie. It's her big day." I felt numb. The familiar, suffocating weight of being the secondary character in my own life crashed down on me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to kick her out. But I looked at my mother's pleading eyes and the clock ticking toward the ceremony, and I swallowed the bile in my throat. I wouldn't let her ruin this. I was marrying Tristan. That was all that mattered. The ceremony was a blur of anxiety. When the orchestral music swelled, Vanessa walked down the aisle ahead of me. Even from the vestibule, I could hear the audible gasps and the frantic whispers of our 200 guests. By the time I walked down the aisle, clutching my father's arm, the damage was done. The guests weren't looking at me with joyous tears. They were looking at me with pity. I locked my eyes on Tristan, desperate for a lifeline. But as I approached the altar, Tristan didn't look like a man overcome with love. He looked pale. He was sweating, his eyes darting frantically between me and Vanessa, who stood just 3 feet away, glowing in her white silk. When it came time for the vows, Tristan's voice shook. He stumbled over the words. Diane, sitting in the front row, stared at me with an expression colder than ice. There were no tears of joy in her eyes, only a grim, tightly coiled anticipation. We made it through the ceremony. We took the photos where Vanessa strategically positioned herself right next to Tristan in every shot, the two of them looking like the bride and groom, while I stood stiffly on his other side. By the time the reception began in the grand ballroom, I was exhausted. I plastered on a fake smile, accepting congratulations from guests who kept shooting bewildered glances at my sister. The tipping point happened right after the cake cutting. The band started playing a slow jazz set, and I turned around to find my husband to ask for a dance. He was gone. I scanned the dimly lit ballroom. I saw my parents chatting with relatives. I saw Megan glaring at a groomsman. I saw Diane sitting alone at a corner table, swirling her wine glass, watching me. When we made eye contact, the corner of Diane's mouth twitched upward into a small, terrifying smirk. I looked at the head table. Vanessa's seat was empty. A cold dread pooled in my veins. Without thinking, I slipped out of the ballroom through the heavy French doors that led to the estate's sprawling rose gardens. The night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the heat of the crowded room. The garden was dimly lit by string lights woven through the oak branches. I walked softly, my satin heels making almost no sound on the cobblestone path. I didn't know what I was looking for, but my intuition was screaming at me. I rounded the corner of a massive stone fountain, the water masking the sound of my approach. There they were, half hidden in the shadows of a weeping willow. Tristan and Vanessa were standing impossibly close. Tristan had both of his hands tangled in Vanessa's hair, her white silk dress pressed flush against his black tuxedo. They were kissing. It wasn't a quick, drunken mistake. It was a desperate, hungry kiss. The kind of kiss between two people who had been dying to touch each other. My breath caught in my throat. The bouquet of white roses I was still holding slipped from my fingers, hitting the cobblestones with a soft, pathetic thud. They jumped apart. Tristan's eyes went wide with sheer terror. Vanessa just looked at me, her chest heaving, wiping a smudge of lipstick off her chin. She didn't look sorry. She looked victorious. Natalie. Tristan choked out, taking a step toward me. Nat, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. You're kissing my sister in a white dress on our wedding night, I whispered, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. What else could it possibly be? Before either of them could speak, the crunch of gravel echoed from the pathway behind me. I turned around to see Diane emerging from the shadows. She was holding a lit cigarette, the smoke curling around her face like a halo of poison. She looked perfectly calm, completely unsurprised by the devastating scene in front of her. She took a long drag, exhaled slowly, and looked right at my crumbling husband. I told you this would happen, Tristan, Diane said, her voice slicing through the humid night air with lethal precision. I warned you that trying to play both sides of this ridiculous arrangement would end in a mess. I stared at her, the world spinning violently off its axis. Arrangement? What arrangement? Diane let out a dark, humorless laugh and crushed her cigarette under the heel of her designer shoe. She stepped closer to me, her eyes locking onto mine with ruthless intensity. Oh, Natalie, she purred, the false sweetness dripping from every syllable. You poor, naive girl. Did you really think my son married you for love? Mother, stop it right now, Tristan hissed, stepping away from Vanessa and lunging toward Diane. You are drunk. You don't know what you're saying. I am perfectly sober, you spineless boy, Diane snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. She didn't flinch as her son approached. She merely raised an eyebrow, asserting her absolute dominance. And frankly, I am exhausted by this charade. You couldn't even make it through the reception without sticking your tongue down her throat. If you're going to be a fraud, Tristan, at least have the decency to be a disciplined one. I stood frozen on the cobblestones. The humid night air suddenly felt like ice in my lungs. I looked at Vanessa, expecting her to look ashamed, or at least frightened by Diane's venom. Instead, she stood tall, crossing her arms over the bodice of her stolen white dress, a defiant smirk playing on her lips. What arrangement? I demanded, my voice finally rising above a pathetic whisper. I turned my glare on my sister. Vanessa, what is she talking about? Vanessa let out a dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes as if I were a child asking a tedious question. Oh, Nat, don't make this uglier than it has to be. You got your big, expensive wedding? Let's just go back inside and pretend this didn't happen. Tell me the truth, I screamed, the sound echoing through the empty gardens. Diane chuckled softly, stepping into the dim glow of the string lights. I will tell you, Natalie, because my son is too much of a coward, and your sister is too much of a narcissist. Diane began to meticulously dismantle my entire reality. Tristan's late grandfather, the patriarch of the family's real estate empire, was a traditionalist with a deep disdain for scandal. Before he died, he placed Tristan's massive inheritance, a trust fund worth nearly $50 million, plus majority voting shares in the company, under a strict set of stipulations designed to force Tristan to settle down before he turned 30. Diane pulled a folded, embossed piece of paper from her clutch, a copy of the very clause that had dictated the last 3 years of my life. She read the core requirements with sadistic pleasure. The age requirement. Tristan must be legally married by his 30th birthday. The character clause. The spouse must be a woman of upstanding moral character, free of significant debt, criminal history, and public scandal. The duration. The marriage must last a minimum of 5 years before the trust fully vests without probationary oversight. Tristan has been obsessed with your sister since they met at a club 4 years ago, Diane said coldly. But Vanessa is a liability. She has 2 DUIs, a mountain of credit card debt from her failed influencer ventures, and her name has been splashed across the tabloids with married men. The estate lawyers would have blocked the inheritance instantly if he married her. I looked at Tristan. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the gravel, his hands balled into fists. So, they made a pact, Diane continued, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. Tristan needed a respectable, quiet, scandal-free bride to satisfy the trust. Vanessa needed someone to fund her lavish lifestyle and pay off her crushing debts, and they both needed someone completely naive and desperate for affection. My brain violently reorganized the last 3 years of my life. Every sweet moment, every quiet night in, every loving text message, it was all a carefully calculated transaction. I wasn't a partner. I was a loophole. The depth of the betrayal was so profound it fractured my reality. I had spent my entire life trying to escape Vanessa's shadow, only to realize I had been dragged onto her stage as a prop. To process the sheer magnitude of the deception, my mind automatically categorized the horrific truth against the fairy tale I thought I was living. I had believed Tristan cherished my quiet, unassuming nature, preferring me over loud, flashy women. The ugly reality was that he targeted me exactly because I was boring and safe, making me the perfect decoy for his estate lawyers. I thought Vanessa's late-night texts were just her seeking brotherly advice, but they were actually coordinating secret meetups and managing his financial payoffs to her. Finally, I assumed Diane hated me for not being wealthy or aristocratic enough. In truth, she despised me because I was living proof of her son's pathetic weakness for Vanessa. "You paid her off?" I choked out, staring at the man I had just pledged my life to. "You bought my sister so you could use me?" "Nat, I do care about you," Tristan pleaded, taking a step forward. "It started as a plan, yes. But we've built a good life. We can still have a good life. I can give you everything you've ever wanted. You never have to worry about money again. We just keep things the way they are. In 5 years, we quietly divorce, and you walk away a multi-millionaire." Vanessa nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Think about it, Natalie. You get the penthouse, the status, the security. I get Tristan. It's a win-win." I stared at the two of them. They weren't just cruel, they were fundamentally broken. They genuinely believed that money could sanitize the rot in their souls. They thought I would just nod, smile, and go back to being the secondary character, quietly accepting my role as the well-paid cuckold. I looked down at the bouquet of white roses I had dropped on the cobblestones. My custom lace dress, the one I had spent months saving for, suddenly felt like a straitjacket. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. In that dim garden, something inside me, the timid, compliant girl who had always stepped aside for her golden sister, withered and died. I looked at Diane. "Why are you telling me this now? If you wanted him to get the money, exposing the fraud ruins it." Diane smiled, a sharp, feral grin. "Because, Natalie, the trust also states that if Tristan commits adultery times before times the marriage is consummated, the entire trust is dissolved and redistributed to the board of directors. I never wanted Tristan to have the company. He is weak, just like his father. By catching them here, before you went up to the bridal suite, the money is gone. I just needed you to see it with your own eyes, so you wouldn't fight me on the annulment." Diane had used me too. I was nothing but a pawn in a billionaire family's boardroom war. I turned my back on all three of them and walked toward the ballroom. "Natalie! Wait!" Tristan yelled, panic finally breaking through his composed facade as the reality of his mother's legal trap set in. I ignored him. I pushed open the heavy French doors and stepped back into the warmth and loud music of the reception. The band was playing an upbeat cover of a pop song. My parents were laughing at a table with our extended family. The 200 guests were drinking top-shelf champagne on my no, on times Tristan's times dime. I walked straight to the bandstand. The lead singer, a man in a sharp tuxedo, paused as I approached. I didn't ask. I simply reached out and took the microphone from his hand. Feedback shrieked through the speakers, cutting off the music. The ballroom fell dead silent. 200 faces turned to look at the bride, standing alone on the stage, her veil missing, her eyes blazing. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice remarkably steady. The acoustics of the grand ballroom carried every syllable perfectly. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight to celebrate. The food is incredible, the venue is stunning, and the flowers are absolutely beautiful. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Tristan, Vanessa, and Diane enter the back of the room. Tristan was sprinting toward the stage, his face pale with horror. Unfortunately, I continued, gripping the microphone stand, the marriage is a fraud. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother, Eleanor, stood up, her hand flying to her mouth. Just moments ago, I found my new husband in the gardens, passionately kissing my maid of honor, my sister, Vanessa. I pointed directly to the back of the room, where Vanessa was standing in her ridiculous white slip dress, suddenly looking very small, as hundreds of judgmental eyes snapped toward her. But it wasn't just a drunken mistake, I said, projecting my voice over the rising murmur of shock. It turns out, Tristan needed a legally binding marriage to a respectable woman to inherit his grandfather's $50 million trust fund today. He couldn't marry Vanessa because of her criminal record and debt, so they made a pact. He married me for the money, and he paid off my sister to keep her on the side. "Turn off the mic!" Tristan shouted at the sound engineer, but the young guy at the soundboard just stood back, his eyes wide, refusing to intervene. "Tristan," I said, looking directly at the man I had loved for 3 years. "You thought I was quiet because I was weak. You thought I was safe because I was invisible, but you made one massive miscalculation." I dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a deafening thud times, that echoed through the silent room. "I know my worth now," I said into the silence, "and you cannot afford me." I walked off the stage. Megan, my best friend, was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. She didn't ask questions. She took one look at my face, linked her arm through mine, and escorted me out of the ballroom. As we walked out, the room erupted into chaos. I could hear my father yelling, Tristan's business partners shouting, and the distinct sound of a champagne glass shattering against a wall. The next few months were a masterclass in scorched earth legal warfare. I didn't file for divorce. I filed for an annulment based on fraud. With the help of Arthur Jenkins, a ruthlessly efficient family lawyer Megan connected me with, we subpoenaed Tristan's bank records. We found the wire transfers to Vanessa's accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars labeled as consulting fees, that perfectly matched the timeline of our relationship. Diane's trap worked flawlessly. Because the marriage was proven fraudulent and never consummated, the morals clause of the grandfather's will was triggered. Tristan was entirely stripped of his inheritance. The $50 million, the voting shares, the penthouse, it all vanished. He was left with a modest salary as a mid-level manager at a firm where everyone now knew exactly what he had done. The fallout between Tristan and Vanessa was swift and brutal. The moment the money dried up, their supposed epic romance imploded. Vanessa had grown accustomed to the luxury lifestyle Tristan secretly funded. When he couldn't afford her designer clothes and luxury vacations anymore, she abandoned him within weeks, fleeing to Los Angeles with a minor reality TV producer. My relationship with my parents was irreparably fractured. When the truth came out, they were horrified, but their instinct to protect Vanessa, to claim she was manipulated by Tristan and needed our support, was the final straw. I realized they would never see me as anything other than collateral damage in Vanessa's dramatic life. I went low contact, finally freeing myself from the toxic dynamic that had held me down for nearly 30 years. As for me, I kept the engagement ring. Arthur Jenkins aggressively negotiated a settlement to keep me from suing the estate for emotional distress, securing a payout that allowed me to quit my corporate job and open my own boutique graphic design firm. I no longer stand in the shadows. I don't let anyone dictate my worth, and I certainly don't let anyone else wear white in my presence. I walked away from the wreckage of my wedding not as a victim, but as a woman who finally learned how to burn down the stage and build her own. If you found yourself holding your breath during Natalie's journey, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable, real-life drama stories. Your support helps us bring more thrilling, true-to-life confessions right to your screen. Have you ever experienced a betrayal like this, or watched a golden child get their karma? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments section down below. I read every single one. Do not forget to ring the notification bell.